Hello, my name is Brian Grubbs, and I'm the manager of local history and genealogy at the Springfield-Greene County Library District. Today's program is part of a series brought to you in partnership with the History Museum on the Square, Wilsons Creek National Battlefield, Missouri State University, and the Missouri Humanities Council. The program series centers on a traveling exhibit entitled The Struggle for Statehood, commemorating the Bicentennial of Missouri Statehood. This exhibit was created by the Missouri Humanities Council in partnership with the Kinder Institute on Constitutional Democracy at the University of Missouri. Support for this program series is provided by the National Endowment for the Humanities. Today's presenter is Connie Yen, who is a writer and archivist with a passion for history and telling stories. She is the author of 2 books on Springfield and Greene County history. Connie earned a master's degree in history in 2015. Her thesis entitled Horse Stealing and Men Hanging, an examination of vigilantes in the Ozarks, is the most downloaded thesis in university history. Since 2016, Connie has been the director of the Greene County Archives and Records Center in Springfield. Connie, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Brian. Thank you for you and the Library Center for your interest in Milly's story. So we are going to jump right into talking about Milly Sawyers. We don't know a whole lot about her, but we know enough that she filed a freedom suit in Greene County long before Dred Scott. So this is in honor of the Missouri Bicentennial, 200th anniversary of Missouri statehood coming up on August 10th. Missouri became a state after the Missouri Compromise of 1820. This allowed Missouri to enter the Union as a slave state and Maine as a free state. The intention was to balance power in Congress between slave and free states. This Missouri Compromise also prohibited slavery in the northern states. Of course, slavery was established in Missouri well before statehood. And also because of the Missouri Compromise, slavery was prohibited above a certain latitude. So what we know about Milly. We believe she was born in Virginia. Our court records indicate that. We know she was owned by a man named Lee, who in 1814 sold her to Moses Bigsby. Bigsby took Milly to Ohio, which was a free state. They stayed there for a little over a year before moving to St. Louis. In 1829, Milly and Bigsby were still in St. Louis, while in Springfield and Greene County was being settled by John Pope Campbell. Milly filed her first freedom suit. In the book Before Dred Scott, written by former Springfieldian Ann Twitty, she states that there were over 300 freedom suits filed in St. Louis. There were hundreds, if not thousands, across the country at that time, but at least 300 and more than 300 in St. Louis. Also, according to Twitty, there were about 40% of the freedom suits were successful. So Milly filed her first suit in 1829 and lost. She refiled in 1833. Again, she lost. 1834. Somehow, Milly found her way to Greene County, which had just been formed the previous year on January 2nd, 1833. We don't know how long she had been here. We don't know how she got here, but we do know that she filed a freedom suit charging William Ivey. As the records say, a free person of color by her attorney complains of William Ivey of a plea of trespass, assault and battery, and false imprisonment. This complaint, done on September 1st, 1834, was based on events that happened August 10th. Milly filed her complaint against Ivey. We don't know who initiated the suit for Milly. She don't know how she got to court to file this suit. We know even less about Ivey. He wasn't in the area very long. We know that he was not a slave owner during the brief time that he was here. We don't know why he thought that he had a right to own Milly, but he did, and she filed a suit against him. Judge Charles Allen appointed Littleberry Hendricks as Milly's attorney. Judge Allen allowed Milly to file her suit as a pauper. This was something fairly common at the time. We have a lot of records where people file suit as paupers. If they were poor, they couldn't afford attorney fees, they couldn't afford court costs, they couldn't afford any of the filings involved in a court case. So they were allowed to file as a pauper, and the judge wanted her to be allowed to investigate her right to freedom. Milly based her right to freedom on the idea of once free, always free. She had spent about a year, a little over a year in Ohio, where, according to her, she became and was free. She told Judge Allen that she feared for her safety as a result of the suit, and that she was in danger of being removed out of the jurisdiction and disposed of as a slave. Milly was afraid she was going to be sold back into slavery. Judge Allen agreed with her. He knew she was at risk of being taken out of the county and sold as a slave. Conversely, he also, though he was going to allow the suit to continue, he wasn't sure she was going to win. He said the suit might ultimately prove unavailing. But nonetheless, the suit went forward. Milly and William Ivey were called into court. Ivey refused to enter recognizance, which simply means that he refused to post bond or have securities in case he failed to appear at his later court summons. Whoever filed security with him would be out that money. He refused to do that. Milly was ordered to be hired out until the case was resolved. During this time, she stayed in the home of John Edwards and his family. Milly also asked the court to award her $500 in damages. John Edwards, he was one of the earliest settlers in Greene County. He was here by 1829, just like John Pope Campbell. Mainly all we know about him besides that is that he worked as the county jailer guarding prisoners. We have numerous court records indicating where the county had paid him money for guarding prisoners. Little Barry Hendrick, this was Milly's court-appointed attorney. He's another early settler here by 1833. He became quite prominent in Southwest Missouri and even became judge for a time during the Civil War. At this time, Hendricks was not a slave owner. We do have one document, 1853 Circuit Court record, that shows he sold a slave, a certain mulatto woman, slave for life, named Mary, to one Isaac Thomas of Cooper County. And an 1855 tax book shows that he owned one slave at that time. But at the time of Milly's freedom suit, he was not yet a slave owner. Judge Allen, this is an interesting man. He was the first circuit judge in the newly formed Greene County. He served from 1833 to 1837. He was known as Hoss or Horse Allen, and he liked to pick fights. Sometimes he picked fights in court, sometimes he did it out of court. He was also known as the very profane man, and once even made the air turn so blue that even little Barry Hendricks was shocked. So he was an interesting character. So no sooner had Milly's freedom suit been filed, she had a court-appointed attorney. William Ivey got together with his friend James Comer and started harassing little Barry Hendrick. They were both charged with disturbing the peace after harassing him. Hendrick said that they were following him from place to place and hung out around his house. He believed they were the ones who broke down the door of his house while Hendricks was away from home. The judge was not pleased. He ordered both men to well and truly keep the peace to all the citizens of this state, and particularly to little Barry Hendrick, for the term of 1 year. So they were to stay away from Hendrick or else. It didn't really matter because by this time, Ivey and his friend Comer had gone to Ray County, Missouri. There were a few more documents in December that elaborated on what Milly went through with William Ivey, what he did to her. Milly Sawyers, a free woman of color, imprisoned and deprived of liberty, held by one William Ivey in slavery. She had been pulled and dragged from and out of a certain place into the public road and imprisoned for 3 weeks. So Ivey beat Milly, dragged her through the streets, presumably drug her to his house. This 3-week period, it would have been from August 10th, when she said the incident occurred, until September 1st, when the suit was filed. Again, she demanded her $500 in damages. Nothing happened with the suit until the April court term in 1835, at which point, in January, before the April court term, there were several subpoenas going out. One was to James Ralph in Washington County. He was called as a witness for Milly. We don't know the connection to him. We know he was from Virginia, like Milly was, but otherwise we don't know of any connection between the two. Milly's attorney, Littleberry, requested subpoenas be sent to 5 men. One of whom was H.A. Burnett, who built the first cabin in Greene County. And the other, surprisingly, was to John Polk Campbell. Campbell was subpoenaed as a witness to prove Milly's freedom. Well, he wasn't going to do it. The sheriff's return on the subpoena said he could not be found anywhere in Greene County. Of course, Greene County encompassed much of southwest Missouri at that time. If Campbell wanted to hide out, it wouldn't have been difficult to do. So he was not interested in testifying for Milly's freedom. But in August, Milly won her freedom. It was by default because Ivy failed to appear in court. He had gone to Ray County and never returned. So Milly was a free woman. Therefore, it is considered by the court that the said Milly Sawyers recover her freedom and that she be free and discharged from the service of William Ivy. Ivy was gone and Milly was free. She had won the first freedom suit in Greene County. As for her petition for $500 in damages, that was to be held over into the April 1836 court term. Judge Allen wanted an inquiry of the damages issued and returnable to the next court term. He wanted to know what had happened to her and why she should get $500 damages, and he wanted it investigated. Unfortunately, the suit never made it to court. 1836, there was a riot in downtown Greene County, and it involved the majority of Greene County's founders. The first one, on the night of April 1st at 9 p.m., James McCarroll, Junius T. Campbell, and Lucius Roundtree were later indicted for burglary after breaking into John Edwards' home and kidnapping Milly Sawyers. The 3 men broke through the front door of John Edwards' home and took Milly, a free woman of color. They beat, bruised, and injured her and terrorized the family. This indicated they broke into the home, they took Milly. Obviously, there were people in the house at that time, and this will be an important point later in Milly's story. McCarroll was an early settler. He owned 1 slave. Junius T. Campbell was the younger brother of John Polk Campbell, had been in Springfield since about 1831, owned the first store in Greene County. He was not yet a slave owner. And Lucius Roundtree, of course, another early settler, been here since 1831. He was not a slave owner and later fought in the Union Army. The next case, John Polk Campbell and James Warren. They were indicted for the kidnapping of Calley Easter. This is an abstract from a document that has 2 signed halves. In the top half, Campbell and Warren, according to this record, did seize, confine, and kidnap a certain free woman of color, Calley Easter, with the intent to cause her to be sold as a slave against her will. So they kidnapped her. They intended to sell her into slavery. This was signed by the circuit attorney, J. Wilson. The bottom half of this document, however, indicates that they knew Easter was entitled to her freedom and with force and arms did kidnap and forcibly carry out of the state as a slave a certain free woman of color. This indicates that not only did they intend to sell her into slavery, but they actually did it. Of course, Campbell was the founder of Springfield. His cabin was the first courthouse in Greene County. Milly's freedom trial would have been held in his home. All of the indictments and the subsequent court cases would have been held in John Polk Campbell's home. James Warren, his friend in the kidnapping of Calley Easter, was here by 1834, and we know he owned at least one slave. Campbell owned 9 slaves at this time. The next case, John Polk Campbell, Sidney Ingram, and various other people who are unnamed, supposedly unknown, they were charged with rioting. Charged with rioting and destroying the home and property of John Edwards. They did destroy with force and violence to injure and destroy the dwelling house and one bee stand. The court records say the mob threw stones and pieces of timber at Edwards' home. One of the witnesses called in this case against Campbell and Ingram was Charles Yancey. Little Barry Hendricks worked as the attorney for Edwards in his lawsuit for the damages against his home. Cindy Ingram, he is famous in Greene County, one of the early settlers. He owned only one slave as far as we know. He's famous for Ingram's Mill. When he died in 1847, he still only owned one female slave. And Charles Yancey, who was called as a witness against Campbell and Cindy Ingram, he was charged with misdemeanor in office. He was justice of the peace at that time, knew about the events, knew the riot was happening, and did nothing to stop it. He didn't stop Milly or Calley from being assaulted, and he didn't stop the destruction of Edwards' home. So he was charged with misdemeanor in office. It was the duty of Yancey to make a proclamation among the persons by commanding them immediately to disperse themselves and peaceably to depart to their habitations. Well, as we know, he didn't do that. Yancey was not yet a slave owner. He became quite prominent in the area. He had been elected Justice of the Peace in August 1835. One final case resulted from the riot that night. Junius T. Campbell was arrested for perjury for lying in the case about James McCarroll, Roundtree, and various others who had broken into Edwards' home and kidnapped Milly Sawyer. He was one of the people who did it, but yes, somehow he ended up being charged with perjury for denying that these other men were involved in it. So those are all the court cases that happened August 1st, starting at 9 o'clock that night, before Milly was able to go to court for her $500 in damages. The aftermath. What happened to all these men who were indicted for all these crimes? Well, McCarroll, Roundtree, and Junius T. Campbell, they wanted the charges dropped. Remember how the one court record mentions that Milly was in the Edwards home, the Edwards family was there and were terrorized? Well, according to these men, there was no human being in the dwelling house at the time. It did not appear that the house had been broken into. And besides that, they said they were not guilty of burglary under state statute. Well, we know from previous documents that there were people home that night. Now, attorneys for these men, one of them was Charles Yancey, who was charged with misdemeanor in office. Another was Milly's former attorney, Little Barry Hendrick. He was no longer circuit attorney. He was now self-employed, working on his own. Their motion to quash the indictment was denied. They went to trial, had a jury trial in August, entered a plea of not guilty. The jury agreed and acquitted them. So the 3 men got away with destroying Edwards' home and dragging Milly Sawyers out of her house and beating her. So that was the first acquittal. As for Yancey, the charge of misdemeanor in office, he was found not guilty. Also in August, August of 1837, Yancey was another colorful character. In 1837, he was indicted for manslaughter after shooting John Roberts. The two had a troubled relationship. They were often arguing over money, court cases, had been on friendly terms for quite some time. So Yancey shot him, said it was in self-defense. The jury agreed, and he was acquitted. None of these things affected his career. In 1841, he was appointed judge of the 13th district, which included Greene County. The perjury case against Junius T. Campbell never went to trial. The circuit attorney announced that the suit would that he would no longer prosecute the suit. No explanation, just dropped it. Campbell served as justice of the peace for a time from 1835 to 1839, and even has had a brief stint as county sheriff in 1854. So as you can see, all the crimes that were committed that night, all the indictments handed down, so far, none of the men were found guilty and went on to lead, the charges didn't affect them after the fact at all. Life went on as normal for them. As for John Polk Campbell and Sidney Ingram and all the other unnamed men who had been indicted for rioting, the disposition pages are missing from the county court book. So we don't have the official evidence of what happened to them, but there's no evidence to indicate that there were any repercussions, any legal repercussions or social repercussions for what they did. In fact, later that year, Ingram was appointed by the county court as superintendent of public buildings. As such, his first job was to present the court with a plan of a courthouse to be built in the town of Springfield, which shall be erected in the public square. And so he did. The second Greene County Courthouse was a 2-story brick building in the middle of the public square. It was no longer in John Polk Campbell's home. For the kidnapping of Calley Easter, who they apparently sold back into slavery, they both pled not guilty, which is no surprise. This was the last case resolved. And this didn't happen until April of 1837. Surprisingly, James Warren was subpoenaed to testify against Campbell for breach of the peace that night. Nothing came of that either. A jury was impaneled, but after hearing the evidence in the above cause of kidnapping, the circuit attorney said he would no longer prosecute the suit. This was a continuous refrain, would no longer prosecute. In 1854, the Missouri Compromise that allowed Missouri to become a state in 1821 was repealed by the Kansas-Nebraska Act. This act allowed settlers in new territories to decide if they would allow slavery. Of course, under the Missouri Compromise, slavery would have been illegal in both locations, but that no longer really mattered. 1857. There had been hundreds of freedom suits across the country, and we know at least 300 plus in St. Louis alone. And of course, Milly's freedom suit in Greene County that she won. Dred Scott filed a freedom suit in 1846 in St. Louis. The case, after about 11 years, made its way to the Supreme Court, where it was decided that slaves could not sue for their freedom because they weren't citizens. It also declared that Congress could not ban slavery in federal territory, so they considered the Missouri Compromise that it was unconstitutional in the first place. Justice Taney concluded that citizens had the right to take their property to any state in the Union, regardless of that state's stance on slavery. So the idea of once free, always free, that was the basis of so many of the freedom suits, that no longer applied either. In any case, he asserted that it was unconstitutional for Congress to interfere with a state's right to have slaves. So there would be no more freedom suits. Dred Scott's was the last one. The Supreme Court decision made freedom suits impossible. Without rights to sue, rights as citizens to sue, they had no legal basis to start a lawsuit or sue for their freedom. So what happened to Milly and Calley? We have no idea. There is no more record of them in Greene County after that night. It sounds like Calley was sold into slavery by John Polk Campbell and James Warren. We found no more record of her. Milly we know won her freedom. She obviously didn't get her $500 in damages, because as that was about to come to court, that's when the riot broke out. And, that may even be why. So we don't know what happened to either one of them, unfortunately. After this, they really disappeared from history for almost 200 years. There was an occasional mention of Milly, such as the Dred Scott book by Ann Twitty. She's mentioned in an archives publication from a number of years ago called Black Families of the Ozarks, and also, I believe, in My Confederate Girlhood. The only reason their stories survive at all is because the court documents have been preserved and still exist. And what brought her to recent attention was a March 2018 article by Jack Bologna. He was in here one day researching another case. We started talking about Milly's freedom suit, which I had just seen for the first time. He got interested, and it was over 6 months later before the article actually appeared in print. There was, at that time, also a discussion panel at the Library Center. I was one of the panelists, Ann Twitty, Marlon Barber, who was a history professor at Missouri State University, and John Rutherford, a historian at the Library Center. It was very well attended, and Milly's story has just continued to grow. After the newspaper article, this is where it was discovered that John Edwards' home was at the corner of corner of Boonville and Olive, just right off the square. Of course, it no longer exists. That area is now a parking lot. But after the newspaper article came the Milly Project. Kendra Chappell, who at the time was a theater teacher at Willard High School, saw the article and became fascinated with Milly's story. Her and her students wrote a play. It was eventually performed at Willard High School, I think not until April of 2019. And since then, it's been performed all over Missouri. It's been performed in Alabama and Mississippi. Her story just continues to grow. These are just a few of the places where the Milly Project has been performed. Her show is still traveling. With Kendra, some of the performers have changed. They've graduated high school and moved on. They've got new performers, but her story is still being told. She went from almost 200 years of obscurity, her and Calley Easter, and now they're known basically nationwide, thanks to those court documents. So that is Milly's story. We lost her to history. She has been refound through the court documents, through the play, through the newspaper article, and we hope she is not forgotten again. For more information about freedom suits, see the St. Louis Circuit Court Historical Records Project. They have those online, and you'll find Milly's there. And Twitty's book, Before Dred Scott, Slavery and Legal Culture of the American Confluence. Another similar book is In the Shadow of Dred Scott, St. Louis Freedom Suits and Legal Culture of Slavery in Antebellum America. And then the Greene County Archives and Records Center here in Greene County, Missouri, in Springfield. We have the original documents. In honor of Missouri's Bicentennial, our project approved by the Missouri Bicentennial Committee was the digitization of our most important circuit court records. Those include the Milly Sawyers case, all of those cases. And then in 1843, we also have another freedom suit filed by Mary a slave. That's the only name we know her by. She petitioned Greene County Court for her freedom and for the freedom of her 3 children. That court case was later dropped, and Mary, just like Milly and Calley, disappeared from our recorded history here. But all of these records and more are found at the Greene County Archives, and they will soon be online. Probably by August 1st, you'll be able to find all of these on our website for viewing. And that's all I've got about Milly's story. Thank you, Brian, for allowing me this opportunity to talk about Milly and Calley.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Connie, for all of your work to preserve this important piece of our history and to share it with so many others. We hope that you enjoyed today's presentation, and we hope that you check out the rest of the programs that we have in concert with the Struggle for Statehood Traveling Exhibit as we explore the history of Missouri's statehood. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a great day.